I wanted to share a little bit on trying to come to an understanding about the difference between Western astrological charts versus Vedic. And I've been mulling over this for a while, trying to get to the root of it and to understand it because, yeah, I like knowing exactly what I'm doing when I'm doing something and finding like that, the answer to why there are discrepancies between things, to know exactly what system I should use. Um, and there's just so much as things evolve, they change over time. And so, I started looking at where the constellations were in the sky at this exact moment versus the astrological dates that were associated to each constellation, each sign, and why the constellation sign dates were different to that of where, like, what constellation was in the sky. So, for example, if you look at, let's say, the spring equinox, if you look up in the sky this year, 2024 coming up, it's not going to be in Aries, it's going to be in Pisces, right? So I kept on looking because I use all these different charts and try to find the patterns. I would always refer back to the Vedic charts to gain information about a client, as well as the Western chart. But I really wanted to know the answer behind like what those differences are and how it matters. And so, so the equinox falls on different constellations every 2,000 years due to the cumulative retrograde action, causing a change of 1 degree every 2,000 years. Okay, so this is the greater cycle taking place relative to the fixed stars. So in the Vedic system, for example, the ascendant rising for me was Virgo, and not Libra. In the Western system, it's Libra. And so why, at the time that the Hellenistic system was created, it was basically created during a period where Aries was on the eastern horizon at the spring equinox. And so all of the qualities that we described, that we ascribed to Aries was essentially what we were sensing and feeling at that time as the spring equinox came about, as we were experiencing what the change of seasons was for us on a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual level. And so we ascribed all of those qualities to Aries because Aries was rising at that time. So those qualities that we ascribed to Aries were really based on our direct experience with the cycles of time and how we were affected, how we're affected by the spring and the changes happening on the earth and the planet around us are really what motivated us to ascribe Aries with all those qualities. So now that, we have Pisces rising on the eastern horizon at spring equinox of this year coming up, does that mean that all of a sudden all of the qualities of Pisces changes? Right? No, because in fact, Pisces was ascribed with all of the qualities happening just before the spring equinox. And so really what matters is our direct experience. And if we're looking at the Western chart, we're looking at the energies of that time period that we ascribe to Aries. So even though technically it's no longer that constellation that is there on the eastern horizon during the spring equinox, we nonetheless still feel all of the changes that we ascribe to Aries. because what we're really trying to do is we're just trying to experience, we're just trying to explain and, come up with a system to explain and articulate well what we're experiencing. So for that reason, I think we can't, throw out the Western system entirely, because on a very earthly level, all of those constellations were ascribed with qualities of those particular times of year. And once we get that kind of straight in our minds, we can then look at, well, now we're talking about the influences of the earth and the change of seasons versus the influences of the constellations themselves and the qualities of those energies. So if we're still experiencing the qualities of Aries, what we ascribe to Aries as spring energy, then we can also look to the Vedic system to see what sort of influences are coming in through the constellation itself, which now places itself, Pisces, on the spring equinox. So I hope that makes sense for you, because really, I think what matters is our experience, right? If we decide to change the qualities of the time cycles that we experience to relate directly to the exact constellation that is rising during spring equinox, then we can ascribe all of Aries qualities to Pisces. But then where is the distinction between the influences of the solar constellations themselves versus the influences of the actual cycles of time that we're experiencing? And I think that's kind of the edge where I'm at in terms of like the questions I have relating to like the qualities that are truly coming from those constellations versus the qualities that we ascribed to the solar constellations based on our experience of time here on Earth. So obviously our experience of the equinoxes, for example, is going to change and evolve over time. But does spring equinox truly feel like, the qualities of Pisces? No, they don't. And so we can't switch them over. It's not as simple as that. And so I believe we have different dimensions and layers to that understanding. One is earthly based and based on our experience here that we then, ascribe to the constellations, spring, Aries. And then we have the true influences of that constellation, which are not as clear and defined because they were always representations of an experience we were having, whether they were us and our relationship to higher forces, relating to the elements, relating to the mythologies and the gods, and these higher layers of celestial energies influencing us. And so they're always a reflection of what we were experiencing and thus what we were able to ascribe to them and then, thus describe them as. So I believe we have our experience of the cycles, the earthly cycles here. And then a layer on top of that, when we move into like the Hercules constellations, then we're experiencing more of a galactic expression of ourselves that is not so earthbound, because the part of us that is earthbound is going to experience directly the cycles. And the part of us that is infinite is going to be connecting to these higher layers, this galactic and this universal kind of experience of what's going on. So on a galactic level, we might experience the changes taking place, which means we'll experience qualities of Pisces that weren't ascribed to Pisces because of its time within the cycles of the equinoxes, but that are actually true influences of Pisces, the forces behind, all of the stars and the planets and the energy within that constellation influencing us during that time, which now is the spring equinox. So it almost feels like, we're shifting out of this completely earthbound state, and we're experiencing greater states, like an expansion of consciousness, which thus reflects in the changing of these constellations with 1 degree, and then every 2,000 years it's shifting. It's more representation of like a change of consciousness that we're going through, where we're expanding our experience here to include and encompass a greater amount of area and a greater amount of constellations, reaching further and further out. So if we're looking at like our earthbound experience here, we're looking at the diurnal motion, the Earth's rotation of its axis, right? The wobble changes consciousness from sleep to waking every 24 hours. We have the sun cycle, the Earth's rotation around the sun, from dark to light, light to dark, waxing and waning of pranic forces of the Earth and its inhabitants, right? So that those pranic forces coming in and creating, bringing light in, and then enlivening everything with this pranic energy. And then when the sun goes down, or the sun is further away due to the seasons, then we are experiencing the decay, right? And that's like the cycles of life and death and rebirth. The precession of the equinoxes, really interesting, as humans live only 1/360th of the 24,000 years of any given precessional period. So we can't experience the fullness of the transition of that cycle within one lifetime, but we're experiencing it on an infinite level as our soul, continues on and is no longer bound to this one body within this one lifetime. And then we have the lunar cycles, major and minor phases. There's 12 new moons in a year, but 13 full moons. So this is why, the question of why wasn't a fucus associated with the solar constellations versus the Hercules constellations. They could have put 13 months in there, or at least 13 periods, but they kept it to the 12 constellations. And this was really just to keep everything, bound to a specific type of order that would create the external forces reflecting back on us that would influence our experience of the cycles. And leaving out of fucus was, in a sense, leaving out that very short period where the sun's elliptic path travels through that constellation, and the consciousness of that constellation that we've attributed to it is really about this release it's a renewal. It's a, it's extracting the poison, whatever is accumulated within the system, within the consciousness, within the experiences, that is no longer needed, is extracted from our mind, body, soul experience here, with the knowledge and the awareness of a fucus. So because that was left out, that was like a huge piece of the puzzle that, unless you go diving deep into the waters, you're not going to have that awareness, to be able to associate those qualities on your path of initiation here. And so, there's definitely something to be said about that and why things are structured the way they are. But at the base, we're looking at these celestial motions and the cycles. That's really what we want to attune to. And then the fixed stars, the constellations within the solar constellations, and these other external constellations, the Hercules constellations and so on. Planets belonging to our solar system have cycles, just like the rising and falling of the sun in the east and west. So too do the planets rise along the elliptical path of the sun over the course of a year. The 12 zodiac constellations each rise to follow the elliptic path and then set, elliptical path, and then set over the year. This is the best answer that I've been able to come up with regarding Western astrology and versus, the Vedic astrology. Their system is completely different, but their people still ascribe the qualities of the equinoxes to those constellations. So there's something there that needs to be looked at. Like there's, when we're looking at all this information and generating answers for people, because essentially that's what, the whole Hellenistic, that's the whole basis of astrology, was to kind of be able to predict what was already destined, and then also to be able to alter the course of destiny. Like it was, all to do with this impulse that was coming in, where we were beginning to remove ourselves from the hive mind and individualize ourselves. And so we wanted to be able to, in a sense, master the stars and have more control over our unique experience here. And so we need to take all of this, information into awareness, and then understand that, if you're looking up right now, the sun is crossing the elliptical, I can't say the word, path. It's right here. Actually, this isn't the correct date. Yeah, this is the correct date and time. So Ophiuchus is over here. We're in between Virgo and Libra. If you look at, the dates ascribed to Western astrology, we're somewhere over here near Scorpius, moving towards Ophiuchus. But technically, if you look up in the sky, we're here right now. So does this mean that the wobble and this going to sleep, like this wobble is wrong, right? It's like something that shouldn't be there, is a good question. If we go from the sleeping to waking, there's kind of a lapse in consciousness, right? And people are slowly learning to build that bridge between their conscious mind and their subconscious mind, so that when they're sleeping, they're still awake, right? We're still able to lucid dream or have out-of-body experiences, or in the least be aware in our dreams, somewhat aware, even if it's not a lucid dream, somewhat aware that we are still processing our experience, right? And then retrieve information from that in order to grow. But the real question is, is this wobble telling us that we're going off track? And then maybe we can start looking at the bigger picture of how the change is affecting us and how it's affecting our experience of the cycles. And then I'll just end it with, if we look at the wobble, right, it creates this procession. Right now, the North Star of the Earth, right, because it's on this axis, is pointing towards Polaris. And in 14,000 years, going off 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, the constellation changing every 2,000 years with the equinox cycle. And then it's going to be pointing to Vega. And we can gain information from that as well. So, if we let's just look at the South Star first, where this is pointing. We always look at where it's pointing north, but where's the south node of this, right? The south node is pointing to the constellation of Octans in the region of the sky that does not have any particular bright star or recognizable asterisms. The main constellation figure of Octans, a triangle formed by Nu, Beta, and Delta Octantis, lies about halfway between the southern pointers of Alpha and Beta Centauri and the bright Archanar in the constellation of Eridanus. But what did this constellation, we always look at what was happening, right? And how is this constellation named if there's no mythologies? It was named in 1730 by John Hadley, who invented the reflecting octant, which was an instrument used for navigation. So our south node right now can be associated, right? It has a correlation to the person who named it, and that immediate energy, just reading off of the synchronicities, was an instrument used for navigation. And that's the south node. And if we go to the north, right, to the Polaris, what was the mythology around Polaris? Polaris has huge mythology from many different cultures. And the Navajo people referred to it as the fire star. They related to two groups of stars on either side of the fire star, the Great Dipper, which Navajos call the revolving male, and Cassiopeia, which they know as the revolving female. The revolving pair are thought of as parents of all the other stars. And with this fire star, they represent principles of home and family life, of being together and around the fire. There's sort of a coming together of these two points of energy within us, right? If we're a female, then our soul is essentially of masculine energy. And then we could talk about the right and the left brain, and these two energies kind of coming together to create this beautiful dance, right? Based on whatever sex we chose to be born into. And then how understanding and coming into harmony with those two qualities and those two energies and the principles behind them, we can start to weave a balanced and very grounded approach to our experience here, and what we can bring to offer the world. And so ancient Chinese people called Polaris the Emperor Star, and many Native Americans knew it as the star that does not walk around. So you have one which is an instrument used for navigation, and one which is the star that does not walk around. So we're going from this kind of state of confusion, of searching, that impulse to individuate, to really try to figure stuff out and almost expand out too far, right? Without, it's just like exploration, exploration, exploration. And then coming into this energy in the North Node is what we're meant to do, which is, you know, it's the Emperor. It's the star that does not walk around. It's very grounded. It knows where it's going. It needs no map because it's really connected to that soul from an internal perspective, right? And it's the chief star. So the chief star was said to communicate with the chiefs of the people to help them resemble the star that presides over his people in the sky. The pole star then was a symbol of stability, leadership, and guardianship, a concept deeply ingrained in the Skitty society. So we're having to step into guardianship and leadership in relation to our connection to soul and our relation to becoming leaders. It's like sovereign leaders of ourselves, right? And moving out of that south node energy of Octan, which is like, you know, using something external, like a compass, to wander around and find ourselves, right? Those are the polarities of our time. Going externally to find, you know, try to, you know, find all the answers versus connecting directly internally, you know, and all this happens at the center of the earth and the center of our core being. And then being able to navigate our ship, like our bodies, our vessels, our soul experience here with a very grounded approach. So I'm going to leave it at that, I think. And I think that's really like a nice way to just end this short little video. I hope that this inspires some thinking and some feeling and greater alignment. Really, the goal is to emphasize the cycles, like our direct experience of the cycles here is truly what matters. So using the Hellenistic Western charts is important because that's really what you're describing when we're looking into those charts. The experience, it's the earthly experience, the solar spiral, right? Experience here that we can learn to navigate. And then once we can really have a very good understanding of how those energies, how our specific time of birth laid out a certain experience of the cycles, like our specific experience of the cycles, and then how all that interplays, you know, and with the planets where they were at specific times of the cycles, the Western Hellenistic. We're looking at those, you know, with the planets, we're looking at how those living bodies were influencing us and influencing our consciousness in the ways in which to experience time and space, right, through the cycles. Then we can start looking at other systems like Vedic, which will bring us into a more galactic experience where we start dabbling into the energies that weren't so closely related to our experience of the cycles here, but actually are more related to our experience of the true planetary energies and the energies emanating those living bodies that are the constellations themselves, that aren't earthbound, right? But they're connected because everything's interconnected, but they have their own experience themselves, and that experience also affects our consciousness, separate from like the earthly cycles, because they relate to us on an infinite level, on a soul level. And then if you go into like Egyptian, right? If you're going into Egyptian astrology, this goes even deeper in terms of it was no longer about, it was related to the earthly cycles and our experience of them, what was happening at that time. So, for example, the Nile was ascribed to specific dates where they would see changes within the Nile during those time periods. But it's even more intricate because then it's split up into the decans. And where it gets deeper is it's then relating to these archetypal energies that our ancient ancestors were interacting with, they were embodied by, because they didn't have that impulse to individuate as much. They were really still living out these archetypal energies as living gods. And so, they split them up differently. And when they attributed these specific gods to those time periods, just like Hellenistic attributed specific constellations to the time periods, it wasn't so much related to just the cycles of, the equinoxes. It pulled in more of a galactic and even universal understanding of the elements, and because it went even deeper into, like the Vedics do with the nakshatras. And so the cycles themselves, Western, Hellenistic. And then these greater cycles, we can look at Vedic, and we can look at, I believe, Egyptian. And then all of these offshoots, right? Which the human design or the gene keys, the Mayan is more closely related to the Egyptian, in terms of like embodying these greater scopes of energy that weren't just constrained to the equinox cycles. But to bring it back, and I really want to close this out because I don't want the video to be too long. If you are looking to, have a real connection, it's first with with these cycles, with these celestial motions that we can observe directly. That is the starting point. Those are the first gates that we walk through, and moving, being in synergy with the cycles and observing what's happening with the cycles, right? And how the cycles within the body, right? The female body, that happens monthly, like the cycles that we experience, that's where we start to make the connection, and where we can truly start to understand this greater connection we have to the cosmos. And then from there, once we dabble into these other systems, we already have a base to understand some of the discrepancies, and to know what information is more pertinent than other information when we're reading someone's chart, and why we look to one chart versus another. So that's what I have for you. And I hope everyone is enjoying this energy that we have going on right now. Scorpio season, always a delight. And as well, this energy that we're in, literally when we look up at the sky, this Virgo Libra energy. I just love this stuff. Virgo and Libra energy is definitely where I'm at. So I will talk to you all soon, and I'm wishing everybody a great season of change.